Thank you so much, Savayo, and a pleasure to finally get the opportunity to share some of my work with you. I have a few slides that I'm going to be sharing with you, so give me a moment to do that. Okay, I think. Are you able to see it? Okay, thank you so much. So the first thing what I'm going to do is that bear in mind the audience, I have decided that I'm going to touch a bit of my research, the external work that I do that feed into policy, because I have one feed. I don't know about others, but in political science, it's normal to have one feed within the academy and the other feed into in the policy making world. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on experiential learning. I'm touching on this and highlighting it with a view to showing you areas or the work that is much more open for collaboration for those of you who are interested in thinking about, because I'm really big on collaborative research work. So the first one, most of the work that I do, they come under the umbrella of a small research lab that I operate from King's University College called the Informal International Relations Laboratory. I'm a political scientist, but my soft field is international relations. So, and I want to highlight four of such research that we've been doing. If we're interested in it, the team has a small website that is under my name called thomastieku.com, and I'll show you the link if we're interested in knowing more about this work. And basically, there are four areas that at the moment we are focusing on. The first one is the back channel mediation process. This is a study that seeks to identify, find out, and in some cases, publish work that are often done behind the scenes in terms of resolving conflicts. In most cases, anytime you hear that a conflict has occurred around the world, chances are that a mediation behind the scene mediation process were put in place and may have failed. That's usual when you hear that there's a conflict. So if you hear that there's a conflict in Ethiopia or often in DRC, as we had from Kanda, for example, it's because there's a back channel process that didn't work. So that's the kind of work that I do in terms of that. So I'm most, because you could see that I'm interested in behind the scene politics, not the drama that often you see in Parliament or the UN Security Council, are much more behind the scenes. So the other work that we've been doing is what we call behind the scenes or informal politics within the African Union, the UN, usually the European Union. I've written more on the UN, but for some reason within, at least in my field, I'm more known or associated with the African Union work more than anything else. And here too, I'm interested in what actually happens before it comes to the public. And some of them, because sometimes the fascinating things that you can learn from it. So just a recent study that we just published in the International Studies Review, for example, showing that the number of issues that do not come into the UN Security Council because 3 countries, US, France, and Britain, have established what they call the pen-holding system on it, that you can't talk about it unless you go to them for them to lead a discussion. So if you see that the Israeli issue, for example, is not in the UN Security Council, it's because you need the US, you have to go through the US to be able to do that. And they use that one to, in some cases, negotiate or block issues that these big powers often do not want to. So those are the things that I'm really interested in, not the drama. It's not the most sexiest, and it's usually don't find it in the newspapers, but that's the kind of thing that interests me the most. Okay. Then the third one is I'm also interested in Africa.
Could you please put in full mode, please? Could you please put the slide in full mode?
Oh, okay. Sorry. That's all right. So, okay. The third thing that also interests me is this idea of Africa's influences in terms of in Western scholarship, and in particular in my field. My field is a field that started by an immigrant from Europe running away from war, and it's to the US, and it's dominated by the Americans. So for them, the world starts with Europe and ends with the US. The rest of the world do not matter. And some of us are trying to challenge this idea. So one of the things I'm interested in is to bring in African ideas. Often, usually I'm really interested in the Middle Ages, right? So just before Africa's encounter with the West. So sometimes, going back to the 10th century, the 9th century, some of the scholarship that we have and how the ideas, international ideas that inform those scholarship and then using it as an engagement. And recently I've been more interested in looking at just the post-colonial research centers and scholars that emerge on the African continent and the way they shape international relations. So I'm just doing a proof of a paper where I'm looking at what I call the University of Ghana International Relations that started just prior to independence. Very fascinating kind of a subject there, but no one really pays attention to it. And then, so here, this one is on the academic front, and I'm also interested in on the policy front, how African actors, government, particularly individuals, shape international politics, because there's a perception within the international relations that the world as we know it was created by the West and for the West. But I think if you really study carefully, it's not, as the story is more complex. So some of us, part of a group of international relations scholars mostly from the global South, showing that the ideas that we have that constitute the world, that makes the world hang together, as actually has a diverse origins, right? So demystifying this idea that everything just starts with the West and Western ideas. So that's a kind of, and if you're interested, there's a book that I just co-edited with Catherine Coleman of UBC, where we talk about the role of African actors in international relations. I also, just a quick one, I have one feet also in the policy world. So what I do usually has a kind of a feed into policy cycles. It can be controversial in political science as a scholar, providing kind of policy, but I always say that I don't care because I think it's valuable, so I do it anyways. So one thing that I do is often work with the UN, often behind the scene in providing technical support for the back channel processes. Most of this work is usually around election-related material, so particularly in West Africa. So election in Ghana, Togo, Nigeria, and so on and so forth. So sometimes I team up with the UN office in West Africa in terms of setting up processes to prevent these elections from turning into violence. That's usually what I spend most of my time. In some cases, I write, documents or papers or kind of backgrounds that feed into broader government document. So I'm working on one because of non-disclosure agreements, you can't talk about some of these, but I'm working on one where I'm doing a mapping exercise that is supposed to help a Western government decide how they engage with both the African Union and then the UN. It's a new government that has emerged, and they want to think about what kind of policy areas that they can engage with it. So I do most of this stuff. Or sometimes I write a very small one called policy briefs that I use for policy making. Here too, there's a number of them for those of you who are interested in. So the first one, the background document, usually around between 25 pages to usually 40 pages. And then these ones are just short 5-page kind of document that is much more succinct, that is supposed to help policy makers make a decision. For those of you who are, if are interested, there's a model or one that my student put on the online during the last Canadian Defense Policy Review, just only a 2-page summary of what I think or my understanding of what kind of defense policy that Canada should put in place as part of the defense, feeding into the Canadian defense policy arrangement. So that's a kind of work that I do in most cases. So if I'm not writing, most of this work they take too much of my time, perhaps too much. So too many meetings. But the other thing that that excites me with the few minutes that I have is just to talk about the experiential learning, which is something that I know that others do it, and I want to talk about it because I've been doing this since 2009. I started at the University of Toronto, and except this year that because of COVID that we couldn't go anywhere, every academic year I have taken usual average between 20 to 25 students to different part of the world. And I'm going to give you some few pictures, just highlight for you some of the work that we've done. Sometimes I pitch it, it's a very research intensive. It's different from sometimes the experiential learning that people do. This is a research intensive experiential learning of which every student would go as a project. And the idea is to collect this data, sometimes among high-level diplomats, usually government officials, ambassadors, and so on and so forth. So sometimes I do it to the African Union, we've done it to the European Union, and sometimes the UN. Or sometimes we don't talk to the politicians or appointed officials, but we talk to the international civil servant within those bureaucracies. And this one is always, I do with the intention of helping the student to imagine what they can do, the possibilities, the futures they can imagine for themselves. And it's been very, very useful to do that. Or sometimes we do a collaboration with an institute on the African continent. So sometimes we've done experiential learning where we've joined students from Western, have joined hands with students from University of Ghana or students from Addis Ababa University in terms of building relationships. Or sometimes we go very local. Here we talk to NGO officials and so on and so forth. Just to give you some few pictures, and then I'll round up because I know that I have about 3 or 4 minutes just to end. So just to give you an example, so this is a classic example of, I think 2020, February 2020, with students going into the UN, here a briefing by UN officials in a UN office. So sometimes we spend the whole day in the UN compound, or sometimes we spend half a day. And this is one of those that we spend half a day, the whole day in the UN compound. It's been briefed by UN officials on, I think, economic transformation ideas that they were thinking about. This is kind of an interview with an Oxfam and Save the Children representative in Ethiopia, where students, those who are interested in doing a project around that, are interviewing these ladies who are on the ground and doing some work. Sometimes, this is a picture we took after lunch in the African Union that I had with the group, and I've been doing it mostly with the lady on my right, wearing the red, Dr. Erin Hanna, as my colleague in the last 3 or 4 years. He's been my partner in crime in terms of, so this is why collaboration is very important. To those of you who are interested, we can, after COVID, we can build a relationship and then do something, I'm open to go into different parts of the world. And it's very popular among students. And this is the European Union. This is the International Civil Servant Briefing 2020 by talking about silencing the gun, which is a new initiative by the African Union. And then we get the briefing from them. This is sometimes we go to historic places. So I took them to the Africa Hall, which was the meeting place of the first president of African countries when they met for the first time as a group within the African Continental Union. So sometimes I take them to this, or sometimes, as I said, research think tanks, and that we spend some time. I spend time with the student, getting to know the kind of work that those research institutes are doing, and then learning from the students within the. Or sometimes we end ourselves, in no man's land. In this particular case, we end ourselves in the Adwa region. So those of you who, if you found me on Twitter and I was making too much noise, is because last year I took students to this part of Ethiopia, and most of the women, we get crashed this wedding on my right, and most of these women that you see on these pictures are missing, and that's why it was as a result of the Tigray crisis, and not only because we try so much to help them through back channel for them to talk, not to fight. And then, so I was disappointed in part because some of these women in the Adwa region they taught us so much, and then most of them are displaced. So sometimes I do a little bit of activism, particularly usually on Twitter. So many of them are missing, and this picture is so meaningful to me because these individuals, we had lunch with them, and all of them we just can't find them. So sometimes this is the kind of nature of the work that I do on a daily basis. So it's always often very challenging. I don't know. I have been trying my possible best. I'm sure that Sebayo and then Isley know very well that I've been trying. I don't like to talk too much about my work and myself. So I've been trying, but finally they got me. So if you need more information, I think there's a website, Thomas Tieku. Or for those of you who are in the Twitter field, we can meet on Twitter, where sometimes I make too much noise. So thank you so much, and I look forward to answering any question you may have for me. Thanks.